we're gonna have a little production panel now of Anitha and Venkata. So if you have any questions about this flea beetle or any other insects or disease, we'd appreciate if you just come and ask the question and we'll try address it for you.
Yes, we can. This was the other one.
Got the right one?
Yeah, that's the first.
That's the first one.
That is the wrong.
Okay, that's the discussion we're gonna do. But I didn't know they were separate. Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I ain't going nowhere. I got it the wrong one.
This is the one. Doesn't matter. Just care that's, yeah,
Okay, while they're taking care of this, any questions offhand? I guess I had a question for Anitha, and I asked John Canola, and she didn't, but we have this nice flea beetle study. And farmers have asked me over the years, well, can we just order our seed without any seed treatment and go after the flea beetles post-emergence, pops out of the ground, let's hit it with Tundra, and probably a week later, it'll be less than the seed cost seed treatment. So do they have that in the study? Or those studies had no post-emergence until 11 days later?
yeah, that. Yes, I wish I can do that research, and that's one of my questions to Jan, because she was the one who was doing research. I said, like, I asked the same question to her. Have you ever tried just using no seed treatment and then following up with foliar sprays? And she said, like, it would be difficult because you should be right there ready with your sprayer, waiting for the seedling to emerge out of the ground. Otherwise, they will eat your seedlings right overnight. And if you don't, these insects, they have these sensory cues, like they choose the field or the plant based on the chemical cues or the sensory cues that they are getting from the plants, right? Like, so they can sense if there is a plant out there that is not protected with any insecticide, they will pound on, or they'll literally, crowd on that particular field. And so literally you have to be there, literally waiting with your sprayer and, waiting to see the seedling emerge out of the ground. If you have time and if you have the, patience doing that, that would be very interesting. It would be interesting for me too.
That was Mike. Any questions from you guys and ladies? Here's a
Question about using a planter for canola. It's supposed to be air seeder. Have you talked to farmers who've done that? What type of seeding rates are they using? What are they getting in terms of yield compared to an air seeder?
Okay, heard the question. The question was on planters versus air seeders and your wider row spacing and seeding rates. I had the one up there, but yes, seeding rates have gone on 15-inch row. Let's just back up. I don't know if he's not here, but from Western Ontario, 15-inch row spacing, the guy seeds at right at that 2.5 pounds per acre. And I think as I talk to guys, there's a lot of that, say 15-inch row spacing. Let's go up to 3 pounds, 3.5. But the problem is on that wider row, and I don't know if I mentioned it the right way, but as soon as we widen the row, we have to reduce seeding rates. If you have a 15-inch row spacing and you planted at the old 5-6 pounds, you're going to have lodging issues very likely. So agronomically, we have to bring that seeding rate down the wider the row goes. Or that inner row competition, plants just start folding away. You got little spindly plants. So we don't have a good number, but we have to keep in mind then, as I showed that Canadian data, only 60 to 70% of the plants emerge. But I think we're doing better than that. I think you guys with air seeders and with the planters, that seed singulation, I think we're doing a better job. And is that answered? But
well, what about yield? Is that compared?
And the yield has been as good or better. We haven't seen a yield drag generally from the wider row spacing. But obviously, like Anitha talked about, with your flea beetles, the more plant population we start with, the more seed treatment you have there. So as soon as we reduce those planting rates down to that bare minimum, we have to be on top of that flea beetle.
With the wider row spacing, are there canopy issues then too, or covering the ground?
That's the biggest thing is canopy, exactly right. Wider row, as he said, you aren't gonna cover that row as quick, but the wider row, sometimes the ground will stay warmer too. You get more, I mean, sometimes it can help you too. But the wider row, that is a concern, but there's 22, and I should back up, the 22-inch row spacing that they kind of first talked about. And Langdon Research Center did a study when we first talked about the wider row. They went to 24-inch, 6, 12, and 24 because their old planter was a 6-inch row spacing, so they're plug and runs. 24 was way too wide. But 22, the idea came up is so these guys, we can spread the acres out. So the guys in the valley that have their planter, they don't have to go invest in an air seeder to do a better job. So that's where the thought came up. And then we're finding that the yields were as good or better if you had weed control and so on. So that's a good question. But so it wasn't that, hey, that's going to be better, but it's turning out as good. And then we get argument between 15-inch row and 20, 22. Well, in wet years, you know, the more rows, yeah, it's a heavier planter. We can run into some issues. So guys like to go wider, so you have less weight on the planter. But that's not going to affect most people, but there's a few that made that decision. Any other comments on that? Any experience? I know a lot of you guys out there have done it different ways, and go ahead.
I'm wondering, I have an air seeder that you could, like with pintle beans, I can block every other
Yep.
row on 20-inch. So with canola, have you had anybody try with their air seeder to do a 20-inch or that's what my spacing versus their 10-inch if they get?
Yeah, not really that. There's a lot of going 7.5 to 15, and that's turning. But I think generally speaking, I'd probably stay at the 10, just as a general statement. I'm sure there's people that it's worked well for, but I would tend to stay at the 10. 20, it's working, but it's just a little more risk there. But lower seeding rate, you're saving 10, 20 bucks an acre seed if you really cut it down, and we don't, but where do you want to save? That's a good question. 20 push it, but if, you know, consider it. I like the idea if you plug every other run, if you can still run fertilizer down the middle run, then that's good because you don't have to worry about broadcasting at all. I didn't really answer that.
Has there been any research on like natural pests for the beetle that you? What takes wasps? What do you need to be?
Good question. We got calling. If any people don't know, these two are husband and wife. So you just kind of see who dominates more. Anitha took a lot more time than the rest of us. But anyway, good question, Anitha.
Yes, there are some parasitoids and predators that feed on flea beetles. However, whenever it comes to biological control or natural enemies, they have a lag when compared to the prey that they are feeding on. So that lag is the advantage for this insect. They come in huge numbers in a short period of time that it doesn't give the natural predators enough time to manage these populations. And moreover, there aren't many parasites or parasitoids that feed on this insect. It's more like ground beetles that feed on them, more predators. But like I said, it takes a little while for the natural predators to catch up with these populations, and that's an advantage for this insect.
Okay, any question for our pathologist here? Anything at all? Lots going on out there. Anything on anything else? Maybe if we're missing it.
Possible to seed early enough to get the canola plant large enough to resist flea beetle population?
That's a.
You can give your experience.
No,
Yeah,
I think it is, but just seems like when we plant it early, the plant really tends to struggle to get up. Yeah, if you got it planted early and it's in that good 3-4 leaf, it'll pretty well combat it, but cool weather and it just grows so slow, and then it has time for the flea beetles to really take hold. But way back in the day, they used to say, yeah, let's plant early to beat the flea beetles. So you're right. We used to say it, but I don't know how early you'd have to be to do that. But a warm spring, but they're driven by temperatures, plant early, but they're going to be out earlier too, versus this year they didn't come out till June. So. Yep. Or planting dates and canola. May 15th versus June 5th. Well, not really on the Langdon data, but we got to kind of draw our line. I know where it's Highway 2, but Langdon, no. If I, after all these years of watching failures and achievements, May 10th versus June 5th, I'd probably rather see June 5th with canola in this northern tier. Just seems like it gets out of the ground quick, more aggressive, and just gets past that flea beetle stage a little bit quicker, just because it gets up and goes.
I would say this year we planted on June 22nd.
Yeah.
It fine, still being.
Yeah,
maybe
yeah.
good.
We can have some tremendous story. We have a June 12th that ran over 2,000 pounds. But like I said earlier, then there was wheat that could run 60 planted in June. So just a tremendous year. But overall, I would say you get a better emergence the later you plant, ground's warmer, moisture that just pops up, and it's a little more vigorous plant, is my experience.
So that point overcomes the point of heat, the dryness of flowering.
Yep.
That's a non-issue.
Well, and the question was on this heat, and that's exactly kind of why over the years, they said beat the flea beetle, but plant earlier to miss the heat. But what we're finding in this northern tier, the heat isn't bothering at all because, we usually have moisture. If you're drought and heat, but you get now to western North Dakota, that's a little bit different. You can see how the crop insurance dates, they let us go to June 5th and there's no deduction of this way. But out west there is, so heat can be a factor if you got dryness with it, but we aren't seeing it in canola this way. I've just never seen a disaster because of heat. And I think what I mentioned, the other part is you could stress it for a few days, 3 days, but its ability to produce more flowers when things cool down. But I think the whole thing on canola in heat in this country is the cool nights. It's hard to find, which is good for these schools, a 70-degree night. It's usually in the 60s and that plant gets such a break, wilts down during the day, but then just comes back strong in the morning. So that's helping us. So the cool nights, I think, are a big thing. But that's why down south, they're trying to get winter canola because they need to try and beat the heat. They really, and they can't do it with spring planting hardwood. So
Can I answer his question?
Yep.
The early planting, you said like early planting may have a vigorous seedling and then that could be help with the flea beetles. Actually, that is the opposite. That's we are noticing in our area is, like I said, like if the conditions are favorable or warm enough for a plant to emerge, that is favorable for the flea beetle too. And they are like coming out of the overwintering and they are ready. When the plant is able to come out of the ground, they are able to come out of the overwintering side too. And that's what's happening in our area is like the early planted fields are getting hammered with flea beetles. That is because that's the only reason, because these are the only fields that are out there and all these insects are waiting out there. They find their food and they're crowding out. On the other hand, late planted canola actually is faring well because you miss that peak emergence period of the beetle. You avoid that peak emergence and you plant it a little later. You can avoid the flea beetles. And since.
what do you say?
What did you say?
Wait for all your neighbors to
Yeah.
plant.
Then
right.
that's being smart. Yeah. Let them have them, That's actually a very smart move. And I've been telling this for so many, for years. But I know, farmers are very limited on their plant during the planting time and they have to go. So I understand that, but this is an easier way to avoid the flea beetles.
So I know we always focus on the early flush of flea beetles, but this past year we had a sustained late flush in about August of flea beetles. Is that something you should even like put insecticide on or just blow it off? Don't really worry about it, it's still gonna die for winter anyway. You have to spray again next spring anyway. Is it worth throwing in the insecticide or not?
Oh, I'm sorry, I missed
The
you.
fall, the August ones, when they merge in August,
Yeah.
Are they worth spraying? Or
I think we're,
Oh, okay, yeah.
I can come.
Yeah, you can comment too, but my opinion is like, yes, if you want to spray, you're only getting your revenge on it. It's only a revenge spray. You can kill that population. But what about the other populations? They can just fly into your field.
So you're not gonna see a negative yield impact.
No. Oh, you mean in spring?
No, it falls.
Nah.
When they-
In fall?
Yeah.
No, that's what I'm saying is like, they are more patchy in the fall. Those populations, they try to crowd in certain patches. And like I said, like if the crop is mature enough, no matter how much feeding they do, they won't hurt the yield. But they are like right at that flowering and pod development stage where the seed is developing and you have tons of leaf beetles on these plants. Yes, you need to spray at that point.
Also the risk of frost.
Right, yeah, the spring frost, we've seen that enough, seeded early. Canola is actually tougher than we think. I mean, it's a cool season crop, but that's another thing on frost. If you're gonna seed early, high residue is always worse. The ground just doesn't release any heat, so you have more chance of frost in these no-till high residue situations by seeding too early. But on the fall, I won't read the different opinion, but I really think when that plant gets plastered like you see, I mean, they're just covered. We have a picture of it, and it's pitting, and that pod is just drying out prematurely. It's gonna hurt the yield on that plant. That's my observation. So, but I kind of said with straight cutting, if you got the little patches like Anitha said, it might help you. If you're straight cutting, they'll just dry right down. So this because they're gonna chew so much on them, they'll desiccate right out. But if I had a large field and they're hitting it hard, again, it's kind of like to be the first, don't be the first field, but don't be the last, because they can really concentrate in there, those fall beetles. And I think they can cause damage. We don't have a good count to give you, but if they're pitting and just doing a heck of a job, I consider spraying. There's a lot of beneficials out there at the time we gotta be careful of, but I saw that one year on the Langdon plot when they had the planting date study. Okay, 2010 and 11, the late did well, and then in 2012, the late yielded very poor, the last planting date, but it was plastered with flea beetles. Because it was late, and so then the harvest data came, but it was just white and dried up. That data wasn't recorded, but that's what hurt the yield on the late plant. So I think they can be a problem, but we just don't have the research data to say, yeah, spray, but it's a good chunk of the field and they're pitting it, that pod will have to dry out when it makes that pit. It's just gonna turn like.
If you have populations, uniformly, like majority of your plants are covered with flea beetle, yes, you have to,
Yeah, that's what I said. Again, you'll see while they say general saying, well, no, it's passed, don't worry, but I think there's cases where you should, honestly. And you get your money back quite easy.
You talked a little bit about desiccating versus not desiccating. I talked about western part of the state, guys are like, we don't need to desiccate. Here, I guess as a rule, most people feel like you have to desiccate.
Most are desiccated. Yeah, that's again kind of an opinion, but yeah, out west, I don't know if it's some bigger fields and stuff. I mean, they just seem to just wait it out. But with the pod shatter resistance, we can wait it out. So I think it's a lot in the year, but no, it's. There's a few guys in Walsh, I know in Cavalier County that don't desiccate. They don't. And they've experienced it. They've done fine. The next guy says, no, I have to, because it's uneven. So then they desiccate it. But this last fall, this coolness, we got so late and the desiccation was, well, if you didn't desiccate, it was really late, but the desiccation didn't really do much. So it's a mixed opinion. It's a good question because we've got guys that have done it both ways and jump into one the next year, say, no, I'm gonna desiccate. But a lot of that is on the weed control too. Got a lot of weeds, and usually canola isn't a problem because we gotta have a good stand, but if there are a lot of weeds out, then you desiccate. But it's a good question. It's still an unknown. A lot of guys are learning, and like I said earlier, that there's no year the same. What works this year isn't gonna work next year, or might not, or it might work again. So there's not a hard fact on that. In Canada, they say it's about 50-50 desiccating and just letting it go and naturally dry it, or natural harvest. Anything else on that stuff? Yeah.
No, my question is about synthetic pyrethroids. Which one's the best?
There you go.
There's like 50 of them out there, so, like you were talking about bifenthrin, we were using primarily Landicell because that was what was available. But has anybody done any work on that? If there's any like longevity of it, photochemically decays, but which one's the best one to use?
You mean like use as a foliar spray?
Yes.
Yes, you use Landicell.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, those two are the most popular pyrethroids, bifenthrin and lambda-cyhalothrin. And I think both of them have very similar efficacy. And pyrethroids, like they belong all are under the same chemistry and same group. So they usually have the same residual levels also. So I don't think there is a recent study that was comparing any efficacy, but I'm pretty sure that they all have the same residual level of a week or at the most a week. Yeah.
Good question. Anything else?
That's grade one field, Diamondback moth. Next year's crop, do I have to be aware of Diamondback moth again, or? Is it just over?
Yeah, diamondback moth just affects canola, but they move in from the south. See, when we talked, I kind of did mention a little bit about the Bertha armyworm. Now that we had in southeast Cavalier County pocket in there, and they just kind of kept reoccurring. They'll survive here, but the diamondback moth typically has to move up here. So what we have in 1 year, we don't finesse. But 19 was bad, and actually 21 we got pretty bad in the stretch there. But again, it was where all the low rainfall time periods were. So that population just built. There was pupa, there was larva, there were the moths laying eggs, and it was just a vicious cycle.
I was reading online where Diamondback moth is one of the biggest pests in the world.
Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
Because
It destroys a lot of crops.
Yep.
It's actually a major pest in the vegetable crops. That's
Cabbage.
cabbage and,
Okay,
sorry. Yeah. And the problem with this migrating pests is like why we see them 1 year, one year they're not there, is like they have to come in from south, and the timing when they come in, it makes a difference. Like if they come in very early stage of the crop, yes, they multiply, go through, diamondback moth can go through up to 3 generations in one season. And so suppose the diamondback moth came in like right at that 2 or 4 leaf stage, it goes through 1 generation, second generation. By second generation, it builds up the populations. And that's when you see most of the damage. That is, the second generation is the most important one, because that's when the crop is at the flowering and the pod development stage. And that's when you have a huge population of insect to feed on. But like this year, we didn't see that. The insect came in late, and so it didn't have time to multiply and go through the second generation. By then the crop matured. And so that's the problem with this migrating insects is timing. When they come in, they should have the right temperature conditions, not heavy rainfall or very humid conditions, because that will kill the insects. It doesn't help them to multiply. So
How far apart is it?
30, they go to 30 days.
I sprayed during flower.
Mhm.
Then I was out there checking again, probably time was starting to dry. I saw another infestation at the time. Didn't spray that time. I didn't know if it was gonna do enough damage to spray.
Yeah, the most vulnerable stage for the crop is right around that flower and pod development stage. That's when they can cause most damage. And once the pod developed and the seed development is done, all they can do is go and scrape the surface of the pod. It will still cause damage, but it's not like very huge damage because development is already done.
We want one for or I was just gonna mention, if you guys were in here earlier on that aster yellows, and what happened was in 07 it was bad. And again, those pods just turned into little bladders, and what aster yellows is spread by, if I didn't finish saying, I don't remember what I said, but leaf hoppers that move up from the south. So in 07, it was an earlier spring, a lot of south winds, and down around Crookston and there, they talked about leaf hoppers. And anyway, so they got in 07, so it really decimated some of the canola. And then it came to 2012, and I showed this study where Scott Hawley, our pathologist at Van Cap's job now. Anyway, I told him in 12, when they were talking about leaf hoppers, I said, "God, I'm so concerned with canola with aster yellows." And he said, yeah. And anyway, he had this canola plot that he was doing his blackleg study. So he said, well, I got this empty wrap. He saves it for some new products. So then he put in Tundra, bifenthrin. And anyway, didn't think any of that. We didn't pay it attention. Then in the fall, he sent me the data and said, look, Ron, what happened? So we didn't get out there to evaluate those plants but it killed that, obviously killed that leafhopper in those reps. And then the aster yellows just didn't spread because it's a weird disease. It's a phytoplasma. Only this leafhopper carries it, the aster leafhopper, and feeds on the plant and then infects it. Then the pods turn into bladders, nothing in them. So they're really decimating them years. So ever since then, since 2012, I'm just thinking, are we going to have a bad year? And if we do, well, we got to get on this early. It would be during this flea beetle control, 2 or 3 leaf is when he sprayed it, or 4 leaf, 2 leaf to 4 leaf. So if we're going to spray for flea beetles, we could be killing this leafhopper if it comes in. So we don't want to spray to just spray, but it's been in the back of my mind. Are we going to have another 2007 and 2012? So we got 10 years running now. Find an odd plant that has those little bladders instead of pods, but not that whole field. So very concerning, but so we'll just consult with that. We'll hopefully keep our eyes open. And if you hear about leafhoppers, like in mid-May or whatever, or at first part of June, consider that as an option. Because we have no data to support it, just one yield trial where that insecticide was put on. Canada, all over, they say, well, there's nothing we can do about its timing. So just keep that in the back of your mind if we have one of them springs. Here's Venkata.
Anyhow, you guys don't have any questions for me. I have a questions for you guys.
There you go.
Okay, I'm just wondering, have you, I know everybody uses resistant varieties for blackleg control. So you guys go for a different variety each year, right? That's like, it says rotate the varieties. Do you guys still do that? Okay, that's and the other one is, do any of you go for any fungicide application to control of blackleg, like 2 to 4 leaf stage, 2 to 6 leaf stage? That's the, if anybody wants to spray a fungicide, it's the recommended stage. So anybody does that over here? Any fungicide? Okay, good. Yeah, that's all I wanted to know. It's like, yeah. You do? Oh, okay. Which chemical you use? Quadris?
Whatever Breck,
Headline or, huh?
whatever Breck is recommend.
Oh, okay, okay. So like, yeah, usually the QIs they do at the time. So I don't know, but like, say out of 40 or 50 farmers, one does. So it's good to know. Thank you. Yeah. So, but that gives me an idea, like whether I have to focus on that aspect of research or not. So to provide answers to you guys next time. Thank you.
A big question back to Venkat here on this verticillium wilt. Now, variety resistance, they're getting some. Where are we at? What should we, because you mentioned about them fields that were bad.
Yeah.
What should these farmers do as far as selecting varieties? Rotation's a big part of it, or is that all we can do?
So far, that's all we can do. Longer rotations. It will help several other diseases too, along with what that are prevalent in our area. The thing is that this year, the farmers who have called us and asked to inspect their fields, in Pembina County, I saw one variety, it's totally bombarded. The other variety, it doesn't have. So he wanted to go for that kind of variety. And the same thing, I went to the Rolla and Barno, the variety which was doing good over in Pembina, it got bombarded over there. That means no varieties which we are commercially available for us are completely resistant to that disease. So there is no, I can pinpoint a particular variety. This is working good and this is not. So we have to do a lot of work on it. And there is.
Why do you think that was? That's a curious thing.
That's like, everything, probably the other person has a longer rotation than what he was using. Or, yeah, such kind of things we can figure it out. Yeah.
Somebody had told me that conditions were right this summer for knee stripe because it was dry for such an extensive period of time in the summer.
Yeah.
You talked to that.
Yeah, exactly. The question is like the weather, whether the weather is very congenial for this disease to show up. Yeah, definitely. First, we had a very wet period. I showed you a slide like that, like once we have moisture and the disease cycle picture. We had rains every, if I can say that, like every other day, 2 days or so, we are receiving rains initially when we planted canola, right? At that stage, the pathogen germinated and infected the roots, very tender roots. That is the very ideal stage for it to infect the canola plants. It does. Then later on, it got drier, and drier, right? So that gives the pathogen to develop, flourish more. Once the temperature gets warmer, but mainly the soil temperatures, and there are second flush of germinations and infections. So on it happened. That's why we haven't seen all the favorable conditions lined up this year. That's why we saw it. But the initial identification we did, the verticillium stripe in our area was in 2020. We got some samples from Mackenzie County, way in the west. Mackenzie or Montreal. Okay. Like they sent us the samples. So we tried to figure it out what's going on. We have other researchers too. So we sent those samples to, see what all of them said, no. But somehow I got the cultures, which I felt like they are that disease. So I tell him the nearest guys who can help me with identification here, as in Manitoba, University of Manitoba plant pathologists. They have that problem. They are working on that pathogen. They right away said they did the molecular work, which I showed the slides, and they confirmed that, yeah, you have that. So the confirmations which I did were from the samples are from 2020. So we are having that problem in our area, but this year the environment was very congenial for the disease to develop. It showed up.
How long will it stay in the soil? Say 10 years. How long does it take to drop off during those 10 years? When you can reasonably come back to the same field,
that's like,
if you were hit hard
yeah,
this year.
like 4 years. So like fourth crop, the seed for club root. In 2018 we had a very bombardment of club root in our area. Okay, then 2019 they went for some cereal grains, and 2020 when they went again, it showed up. Some people went for a resistant variety. Okay, so then the next year they went for a small grain. In 2022, because of late plantings, they were asking us whether is to switch to either field peas or soybeans or flax or different other crops. We have a lot of crops in our area, right? So they moved from canola to the other crops. That's the reason I didn't see any clubroot infected fields in our area this year. So the longer the rotation, the lesser the infestations. So probably if we can do the same thing for verticillium, it will work.
Is there anything you can do to speed up the degradation of the spores?
So it's
You work it or you don't work it?
no, it's like nothing has been done that way to speed up, or it's a soil-borne pathogen. Once it's in the soil, it's there. Not much can be done. Some people say that fumigation with methyl bromide and all this, all are banned chemicals in our area. So some part of Australia, they have tried that research, but it's not a recommended chemical. So that's all we can do so far. So a lot more, unless we get a resistant variety, we can't say that this is the silver bullet for this. Verticillium is a very common pathogen in other crops too. Like it's Verticillium dahliae. Have you heard of that? It occurs in sunflowers and a lot of other crops. This is little bit different than that. Just the dahlia has a small spore. Verticillium, which infects canola, it has a long spore. That's why it's called Verticillium longispora, and it infects only cruciferous crops: cabbage, cauliflower, canola, radishes. So it is a
Rotation for sclerotinia.
it's the same thing. And for everything, 2 years or 3 years, you can do it. But I have noticed over the years, like we have the very good fungicide chemistry available. And I would recommend every farmer to go for a fungicidal spray at 20 to 30% flowering. So that will take care of it. Thank you.
Okay, real good. Question back there.
Back to the row spacing.
Yep.
Like, they have a disc drill, they can do either 7.5 or 15s. Planter, you can do 20s. Seed cost, I don't care what the yield of that.
You know, good question. And if you didn't, I think we'll call you back, but I heard it coming, but. You know, I've seen so many successful guys with that 7.5 inch spacing. And they're cutting seeding rates down to that 3.5, 4 pounds. And you canopy the ground better. And I think that's perfectly fine. If I had that option, I'd stay with it. The only reason I go to 15 or 20, if you're thinking of using that with your soybean, but solid seeded soybeans are working at 7.5 too. But so I don't think we'd have, and we don't have a good data source to say that's where the yield difference is or how much more it would be, but I personally think 7.5 is good, but again, you don't have to plant 5, 6 pounds, you know, shoot for that 300,000, 350.
So the less hairpinning with a planter, potential, like, moving around.
Well, if you want to set up like these reveal, yeah, for that residue getting it either, that would definitely have an advantage. But we don't have a good trial data to show. It's just these farmer experiences, which is important, but we just don't have a good way to study that. What'd you do? I didn't hear that. Okay.
Comfort and control would be.
Yep. And that's, I think it's those same amount, yeah. And the one study or the 6, 7.5 versus 20 inch, I showed it earlier, and there's actually about 300 pound advantage to the 20 inch spacing. And they cut the seeding rate. So, but we gotta be careful on cutting the seeding rate, but good question. And I think we're gonna sort through that, and you guys are the best experience. And now we're gonna learn a lot more. Just what's happened with technology. All you guys know with your planters and your combines, you can just record everything down the field. And my advice to everybody, not on this planting ain't gonna help, but whatever you're trying out there, in this sulfur I mentioned, leave a check strip. And I think, or just a strip without any, whether it's the size of this room, but just shut the applicator off. Then you can observe it. Even with nitrogen, just shut it off, because you always get the call in June there, oh, should I top this? It looks a little yellowish. So if you have that power, shut it off, or else go a power strip, double the application. And I'll say nitrogen, and then it might be a large area, but it'll give you a little handle on it. I just see too many times I'm in with CHS and the sales and, well, try this, but run some strips out there. The only way you'll know is to try it. And 1 year probably isn't enough. The next year, you know, like research trials, we aren't really confident until we get 3 years of data. So same thing with your observations, but with these yield monitors on combines, tracking where you are, it's gonna make things a lot better, easier to try and compare 2 different scenarios.
Do you have anybody that's population?
Good question. The question is on variable rate. No, we haven't. I haven't seen any trials. Anybody really doing much of that. I would think there would be an option with it, but especially, you know, the same thing to get in that foreground, but then saline ground, well, you kind of want more plants there to give it a chance to grow. So you hate to cut the rate, you know, fertilizer you cut there, but as far as planting rate, it's a good question in research. Hopefully we could do some on there, but research centers, they just aren't equipped with that type of stuff. Like I said, when they compared wider row spacing, we had that 6 inch row planter. So you plugged the row, you had 12, plugged another one, and then you, well, obviously 18 or 24. So we just couldn't get anywhere in between. And a double disc drill won't singulate seed at all. I mean, it was dropping 4 or 5 seeds, and we just couldn't get any good data out of that. So hopefully we can get some more. I was gonna say to another point, like Venkata, on the spread and the rotation, and what I've seen over the years, and again, it was a new grower that I know well that planted canola for the first time ever on the farm, and it was 3,200 pound yield. Never planted before, broadcast seeded, probably marginal, but you get that ground that has not had a crop before. and that crop just excels. And I think that's why we're seeing a lot of good things with sunflower, but a lot of guys have put sunflower for 10, 15 years, and you get that crop in there. What ran us into trouble in the 90s then when scab and that were, and through the 70s, monocultures, weed after weed, we'd sneak a little canola in, but now we've got soybean in the rotation, edibles, canola, wheat, our wheat yields are even holding better. We have better fungicides, but I think this, the longer we can spread that rotation, we go 4 years on every crop like Venkata, that'd be ideal. We can't always do it, but that would really help us out a lot.
Can I ask a question to you guys? Like, what are your experiences with the seed treatments for flea beetles?
Are they working or?
Are they working seed treatments?
Especially if you plant later, the soil is harder, it emerges fast
Mhm.
and you don't have to spray.
Yeah, so that's the answer for your question. Like, the later you plant, nice warm ground, it gives the seed is up quickly and it grows faster so that it can beat the flea beetle feeding.
Still has residual chemical.
Yes. And in that, if you plant late, I think you can get away with just one seed treatment. The early planted ones are the ones that are getting hit earlier, and then they had to go for a spray. That's when we are finding problems with the seed treatments. But late plant, you can get away with just the seed treatment, one seed treatment. And it can be just neonic or a premix. It doesn't matter. And I've heard this from growers too. Like, some growers, they're like, oh, we just used Prosper Evergold and we didn't have to spray again. But I've heard people who have used premixes and they still had to go and spray, not just once, but twice. That is because they went in early. So it's all the timing of when the plant is coming up, because remember this, the seed treatments work only for almost 4 weeks. And if your seed is sitting in the ground for 2 weeks and then it is up, and then what is your time for the efficacy? It starts going down, right? So that's where we are finding, like I said, seed treatments are not the answer for our issue. You know, it's like you have to look it at different angles and tackle that issue with the different approaches.
Okay, we're about done. I just, final note is, I think for the Roundup committee, I think Anitha, they're on there, but I like, in Roseville, they had a farmer panel. We had a canola day last year, but if you guys, any farmer would like to be up here, it's fun. Good questions on the 7.5 inch 15, but if you have a farmer answering that has done a lot of it, makes it a lot easier than us kind of speculating. So that'd be a good grower panel, I think. Because a farmer that's had experience with something, you can't beat that. Been out in the trenches and did what we're kind of assuming they did. So good questions on that row spacing and seeding rate. Obviously, we need a lot of work to do on it, or a lot of work. And it's not so bad now. You got to all admit, the last 2 years have been good yields, good profits. But when the margins are going to get tight again, you don't have to seed 5-6 pounds of canola. If you can drop that rate in half, you're saving $30-40 an acre. It's going to come back into place. So in these years, we try to learn what we can on these better years. Yep.
His question, we variable rated our canola.
Okay, good.
It's opposite of corn. You put your low rate in your best ground, and your high rate on your bad ground.
Yeah.
Average like 4, just a little over 4 pounds a day.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. And I think you get into the good ground to get them higher seeding rates, and then we're gonna have more conducive for disease and lodging. So maybe just a few less plants there. So that's a good observation. And I'd agree with it. Good point. Yep.
So, looking at last year and talking about that, what do you see as the major contributing factors to the lodging that happened?
I think a lot of it probably is this verticillium wilt you talked about. There was a lot more than we thought, but we had lodging early, and I think it's probably, I would say if anybody planted real low seeding rate, I would suspect they had very little lodging. I don't know if that's kind of a blanket statement, but we're tending, we had pretty good moisture, so we had good emergence. So I don't know if we had the 60% emergence or 70, maybe it was 90, and I think smaller the stem and we get them, but if you got a heavy rain to start a flowering, it's just gonna go down. That's just a problem. Did you have any experience or all yours lodged or?
More variety wise
Yeah,
than anything else that I can think of.
not on seeding rate or planting rate, okay. Anybody else have any comments on that, the lodging? Yep,
So we had some lodge and it ran well and some lodged and ran absolutely awful. So.
Yeah.
I don't know what, that was the same variety too.
Yeah, that's the same thing all over the counties, different counties. Whoever invited me and I also surveyed 11 counties around. All of them have the same condition, some area is good, the other area is bad. So in that, most of the lodging was due to verticillium. There are other things too, like black leg and the white mold too. But this year, due to verticillium, it's more. So if some farmers have reported that the lodging happened right away in flowering, late flowering, very early lodging. So if you have seen, that's definitely due to diseases. So that's what we are trying to do more work on it. And as this gentleman has mentioned, it's good year for that kind of disease to show up. It may not do the same thing next year. The weather may be different. So, yeah.
Have you seen any lodging due to over fertilization?
I haven't done the surveys in that way. It's like when you go, as a plant pathologist, my research focus is very narrow, and I just go look over only for diseases. Yes, it's like no.
very good question on that lodging. To give you a scenario, there was a mistake made on an application several years ago. Put fertilizer on, the guy put a full rate of nitrogen, and then the other custom guy came through and put a full rate on, and we're looking at about 400 pounds of nitrogen. And the person wanted to grow canola. He was just dead set on it. So we kind of analyzed the thing and how can we reduce lodging? Because it could lodge if you get too much nitrogen. So what it ended up doing is putting a little more nitrogen on. We made sure that nitrogen sulfur ratio, I talked about 7-to-1, we put some more AMS on to get the sulfur rate up and planted it at just over 2 pounds per acre with a 22-inch row spacing. And it yielded more than any other crop you had. So we kind of combated that lodging by wider row and very thin seeding rate, just big old stalks. Those plants are like that. So they didn't lodge. So you get that big guy that's sitting there alone and he won't lodge. Yeah.
I think some of the lodging is from overseeding.
Higher seeding rate. What?
Overseeding.
You said it and I'm glad you did. I did. Yeah.
We were seeding at 3.5.
Yep.
Neighbor. It was the first year we've had canola.
Oh, okay.
And our neighbor, when I looked at his, I thought, well, we're screwed because I ain't got enough plants out here.
Yeah.
Well, his went down. He got way overseeded.
Very good point. And we tend to, that's kind of the human nature of it. We want to make sure we have that stand, and we just psychologically, even all week, we just kept going up. And now you find on some varieties, even soybean, some are going up to 250, 300,000. Well, we got to get back. So I think it's a good point, and we just have these other issues. But canola lodging to high seeding rate, I'll agree 100%. Seed company guys probably won't, but that's what we've seen. So
I don't know, I've read this and I have seen this also. Canola is, I think, one of the unique crop that compensates very well for thinner seeding rate. I read this and I heard this, and like in years like where this flea beetles or like hail or early frost that takes off a few plants and there is a thinner stand, it grows and it covers and it compensates very well.
Well, again, it's break time. Thank Anitha and Beneda.